Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Thank you for your time. Goodbye. Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. As India prepares to celebrate 75 years of independence, how different is India to the country that got independence in 1947? And what sort of country do we hope to be 25 years from now? Those are two of the issues I shall raise today with one of the foremost intellectuals of the Bharatiya Janata Party, columnist, historian, and former Rajya Sabha MP, Swapan Dasgupta. Swapan Dasgupta, in 3 days' time, India will celebrate 75 years of independence. How different is the country today compared to the one that got independence in 1947?
Well, it's similar, but it's also profoundly different. I often hear people carp and say, this is not the India I grew up in. But that's inevitable. That's only natural. I think every country changes quite profoundly in a way, and India is not the only one. Of course, there are large elements of continuity which exist in India, not least because we have, in terms of the political structure, the state structures, there's a measure of continuity. But in terms of society, I think we have changed immeasurably. I think the India that was there in 1947 was an India which was still half straddling various different worlds. It was straddling a world which was sort of somewhere in the 19th century. Some parts of it was even earlier. And then there were others which were in the 20th century, very contemporary. So there was a very, very mixed bag, and it was marked by unevenness. I think that unevenness still exists in this country, but I think that extent of unevenness has come down. Most notably, I think anybody who came to India in 1947 and everybody who sort of traveled in India in that time observed that it was an extremely poor country. It was an extremely poor country, which was marked by a few Maharajas, which gave a different perspective. But today, I think what we've seen is the huge growth of a middle class. We've seen the growth of a rural population, which is far more confident. In terms of political involvement, I think we've seen the enlargement of democracy. We've seen a far greater degree of consciousness in the people. These, of course, are the elements which we can discern on the surface. But I think underneath everything else, what I would like to say is that in 1947, we regained our national sovereignty after a very, very long time. Now, after how long is, of course, a matter of debate between historians, and I needn't get into that. But let's say after a very long time, we regained our national sovereignty. But in terms of regaining our national self-confidence, I think it was a more mixed bag in 1947. I think I would hazard to guess that today, India is a far more self-confident, assertive, proud country than it was in 1947.
In the light of that answer, let me ask you this. What does it mean to be Indian in 2022? What would you say are the qualities and characteristics that distinguish our country from other countries, perhaps even to some extent make it unique?
Well, of course, there is a degree of uniqueness in India, and I think everybody. But I think I would be. It would always be wrong to try and codify what exactly it is that it is to be an Indian. It's always for everything you say about India, the opposite can equally be true, and without necessarily taking away from the Indianness of it all. Uh, you, you know, I would say instinctively, you know what is an Indian. You know how they react, and it can be also very, very different. Physically we can be very different. In terms of our outlook, we can be very different. But at the same time, I think today what we have is a general loose, sometimes very great commitment to India as a nation state, to India as a country on the map of the world, to India as a flag, to India as an ethos, to India as various spirits. A lot of people talk about the idea of India. I've always had a little, I'm a little dodgy about that feeling, because I think there are various ideas of India. And I think it's healthy to have various ideas of India. It would be very wrong to try and straitjacket everything into one piece. But overall, I think there is, as long as there is a commitment to India, that commitment is really what matters. And how that commitment is expressed differs from person to person and from communities to communities.
You speak about a commitment to India, which is a common feeling that runs through the population. It's sometimes said that Bollywood and cricket, and perhaps political opposition to Pakistan and China, show the Indian people at their most united. How much truth is there in that comment?
Well, I think there's quite a lot of truth in that. I mean, of course, if you want to boil it down to that, yes, there are times in the cricket field when we do well. I mean, there's a lot of robust flag waving, which is there. That flag waving is also very much in existence during any conflict with Pakistan. Pakistan has last emerged as the opposition, the country which really hates India, which stands for everything which we detest. And so their idea is inimical to our very existence in many ways. And China, I don't know whether we hate China, whether we look at it with suspicion, whether we are worried about it, but it's not so much a hate as a profound degree of concern. And I think that concern often unites people. And I think we are in the game of competing with China to establish ourselves as a great presence in the world. So yes, of course, these are uniting factors. But apart from that, Bollywood, yes, but Bollywood is again one of those things. There are some part. There is Bollywood, and there is Bollywood, and there is the Tamil cinema, the regional cinema. Everything, yes, there is a sort of cultural unity which marks India. There is what might be called a very traditional civilizational cultural unity in India. And on top of that, there is an overlay of modernist, and I think cricket, Bollywood, Pakistan, politics, and all that. These are elements of the modernity which comes in. Okay. And both sort of mix together and to form this whole thing about the Indian identity, confused as it may be, muddled as it may be. But that's the reality. And I'm very glad that it's a bit muddled.
Let's, with this in the background, look back over the last 75 years. What would you say are the successes and achievements we have a right as a country to be truly proud of?
Well, you see, I think one of the problems which India we confronted in 1947 was that whereas I always believed that there was something called an Indian nationhood. But India as a politically united state was something which was relatively new in composition. And I think to be able to maintain that with the degree of continuity There's, India is one of those where we just not only have we kept up democracy, but we've kept up the institutions of democracy more or less intact since 1947. And that, if you look at neighboring Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, uh, Afghanistan, God knows where else, any of the, or even look at all the countries which got independence and came into their own after World War II. I mean, India is probably one of the very few countries which is marked by a degree of phenomenal continuity in terms of political institutions, in terms of rather institutions, in terms of the manner in which we function, worked our democracy, etc., since 1947. And that's a considerable achievement. And I think more than that, I think the achievement is that the sense of a modern Indian has grown more and more, overriding some of the local issues which are there. There was an identity you had as a Hindu, there was an identity you had as a Bengali or a Tamil or someone from Gujarat or Gujarati, Assamese, etc. Those identities are always there and they'll always be there. But I think that overlay of Indianness, which I think is there, particularly in the younger generation and the modern generation, for anyone who's sort of born after the 1950s, I think that's very much, and I think that creation of it has been one of our great success stories, for which the credit must be shared by everybody who sort of contributed, since 1947.
Let me then ask you the opposite. What are the errors, lapses, and indeed what are the virtual mistakes that have embarrassed our country?
Well, embarrass is probably too strong a word, but I think if we look at what are the missteps we took, I think one of the basic points which I would have some things is that, did we realize the full potential after 1947? And here I would say, no, I don't think we've quite done that. I think there was a period in which we sort of held ourselves back. Now, for instance, the manner in which we took the development process from about the 1940s till about the 1990s, I think we contributed quite a lot, but I think there was a sense, I think we could have done much better had we opted for some other route. Now, that's a counterfactual because you don't know what would have happened. And I think those who chose a particular state-led development process after 1940s, after 1950s, particularly after the plan started in 52, they were convinced that that was the best thing. I don't question their motives at all. They believed that that was the best thing to do under the circumstances. They believed that equitable distribution was the most important thing. They believed that the state, there was a certain hand-holding to be done by the state. There was a certain hand-holding to be done by the state. And a technocratic elite would be the best vote. Well, they did it. And we did progress. But perhaps, and I say this is a big perhaps because we don't know the answers to that, maybe we could have done a little bit better. But overall, I would say, no, I don't say that anything we did terribly wrong. Yes, we could have done it better.
Okay.
But, we also, the only thing I would say is that we sort of, in a sense, institutionalized inefficiency, and we failed quite miserably to root out corruption at all. And I think that was really one of our great shortcomings.
We're verging into politics, and since politics dominates discourse, let's confront it full face. How much does India owe its first prime minister? And along with that, where did he fail the country?
Well, Jawaharlal Nehru was certainly a very towering figure, and I think we cannot. There are these controversies about whether he should have been prime minister or he shouldn't, or Sardar Patel should have been prime minister. I'm not getting into that. The fact is, he was prime minister, whatever the circumstances, whatever the choices made at that time, and he had a very clear view on what constitutes modernity in India, and he had a definite purpose in trying to say that India must become a modern state, and the where I would sort of fault him, where I have my little reservation, is that he believed in the creation of a new India, an Indian which would be sort of almost cosmopolitan, where he found that some of the inheritance of India to be all right in a very sort of exotic sort of way, but not when it came to the actual lived experience of people. And there he wanted. I mean, one can go into details, but broadly speaking, he wanted a certain rupture between the past and the present. And I think that, in some senses, uh, did affect us in a way. And I think we coming to terms, we emerging as a full-fledged nation with a very distinct self-identity, suffered in some way because of that. And secondly, I think Jawaharlal Nehru was a bit too influenced by contemporary political fashion in those days, which happened to be socialism, which happened to be state-led development, which happened to be heavy industry, which happened to be putting down the private sector a little bit, getting into the state sector. So those choices which he made, they were self-conscious choices. They were not corrupt choices. They were choices made from a very intellectual point of view. But I think perhaps not all those choices are something which in hindsight we would approve of now. But at that time, yes, that was what was the fashion at that time. That was the intellectual fashion of those days.
How much do you blame him for mishandling the relationship with China, which culminated in the humiliating defeat of 1962? How much of the responsibility and blame lies squarely with him?
Well, I think, yes, in that sense, Nehru was almost greatly at fault. And I think it stems from the fact that he saw India as just one of the big newly emergent states of Asia. The uniqueness of India, which even under the British Raj had been recognized, that the central India being the central pillar of the system of empire, whose tentacles ran across Central Asia, West Asia, and he even came down to the Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Southeast Asia. He retreated from that vision. He had a sort of third world, and that third world, resurgent Asia, where he treated China as an equal. So the uniqueness of India was lost. And against that, you had China with its resurgent Middle Kingdom approach. And both of them clashed, and Nehru denied this conflict to begin with. Had he acknowledged this conflict and dealt with it in another way, I think we would not have had that sort of humiliation which we suffered in 1962. Yes, we would have probably still have had border issues, because that border issue really lies in the fact that we have a very different perspective on what our spheres of influence are going to be. And China had that. That is really quite a seemingly intractable problem. But it's how you position yourself vis-a-vis Asia, vis-a-vis the rest of the world, which was at the heart of it. And I think Nehru's perception of India was perhaps very enlightened, very benign, but I don't think it really served us very well.
What about Indira Gandhi's emergency? How much of a blot, how much of a black mark on India's democratic record is it? And to what extent did she atone for it by holding elections, losing, and accepting the result?
Yes, it was an enormous blot. I mean, let's face it. I mean, this sort of extreme step which she took and all that happened along with it, it was really one of the darkest days. Mercifully, it lasted not for terribly long. I mean, less than 2 years. And she was encouraged to have elections, partly because of international pressure, partly because of her belief that she was going to win in any case. But she took that gamble. She lost that gamble, I'm glad she took that gamble because, we are to today a democracy in that sense. We would have been something else had that gamble succeeded. Already there were steps being taken at that time to change the constitution, to make it far more, in line with some of the more authoritarian democracies or so-called democracies which existed in certain parts of the socialist world. So overall, I think Indira Gandhi had a lot of contributions. In Indira Gandhi, the success she made in Bangladesh, uh, the first Pokhran test, these are important milestones in Indira Gandhi's thing. She also won resounding mandate, but she destroyed the Congress party in the process. She compromised democracy. And I think overall, when she died in 1984, she left India in a far more fragile state than when she inherited it.
Now, your party, the BJP, regards Narendra Modi as special. It believes he's significantly different to his predecessors. What is there about Narendra Modi that makes him a special prime minister?
Well, he is special. Every prime minister is special, but Narendra Modi has moved in a very different trajectory. I think that's what's important. Firstly, I think Narendra Modi is guided by a total commitment to nationalist India. So he wants India to be a factor in the world. He wants India to be modern, but he wants India to be very rooted. Nehru wanted India to be modern, but Nehru didn't want India to be terribly rooted. There was a difference. But I think what Modi does is most important. He wants to make is a very self-confident India. And if you look back on Modi's ideas are not unique. You'll find every single idea about what he wants to make India to be in the works of the early nationalists, particularly in the works of people like Swami Vivekananda, Aurobindo, and even Tilak to some extent. This is the basis on which he is going about. Then his great fascination for that India should not reconcile itself as a third world country. We cannot go ahead with this chalta hai attitude. We need excellence. We need to make our mark, and we need to settle for nothing less than the best. These are approaches which I think certainly make it very, very unique. And Modi ji has done that in a very significant way. I think if you look back from 2014 to now, 8 years, this is not a very long time, but I think India has changed quite profoundly. And I think more important, it's the direction in which we are going, which is different in sense. I know there are critics who say that direction is flawed. I mean, that's a question of debate, and that's what politics is all about. But I would say that he's taken India to a very, very different direction. We count in the world today. More important, the Indian is far more proud of himself, herself, than was ever the case before. There's a certain pride which he's inculcated in being Indian. The value of the Indian passport has gone up immeasurably. I think all these things matter. And I think Modi has, in his own way, played a very significant role in getting that. Of course, it's work in progress still, and there's much more to be done. But at least we are today in a position where we can say we're getting there, and it's not a liability that in the lottery of life we were born in India.
You say that Mr. Modi has profoundly changed India. He's taking the country, you say, in a new direction. Indians, you say, have found pride in themselves. In which case, let me ask you this. He's been prime minister for 8 years. He has 2 years more, and many believe he could win another third term after that, giving him 15 years in office. Do you have any sense of how history will remember Narendra Modi and his prime ministership?
Yes, and it depends on who's going to write history. And I think history is written periodically and it keeps changing. Nehru was lauded considerably when He died. If you look back at the obituaries, the works which came out immediately or in the first 2 decades after his death, that was celebrated as one of the greatest international statesmen there is. Subsequently, today, there's a greater degree of skepticism about many of the facets of Jawaharlal Nehru. So, first thing about Narendra Modi is that it depends on who writes history. Secondly, how the India which he's helped craft moves and gets along in the world. So there's no fixed way in which, but the important thing is that at present, most people believe that Modi has certainly given India a certain degree of firm leadership. He's given India a decisive, there's a certain decisiveness in his leadership, and it's taking India along. So there's those various uncertainties which we had to cope with right from the mid 80s. That's gone. That's gone. At least those factors are not dragging us down any longer. And more important, he's taking India in directions which we'd never traveled before. You know, when he made Atmanirbhar Bharat into a slogan, a lot of people say, oh my God, it's back to those bad old socialist days when he'll have shoddy goods and, mediocrity, celebration of mediocrity. It's not that. It means very, very different thing today. There's this whole degree of building your capacity, this capacity building, which we've done. Whether it's in semiconductors, whether it's in 5G, whether it's in any other thing, whether it's in space research, whatever it is, we are entering new frontiers which we hadn't ever entered before. And it's only beginning. The process is just beginning. So don't make a final judgment on how that's going in. And if we go along on this, I think hopefully by 15 years, which I think he would deserve it, he would have left India a much, much, much more significant place in the world than the India which he inherited in 2004.
In contrast, the sun is clearly setting, or so it seems to many, on the Congress party. How would you assess the role Congress has played, not just from 1947, but perhaps from 1885 when it was founded?
Well, the Congress is obviously a very important institution in the country. Its role in the national movement was seminal. It was really the big umbrella body. After independence, it was the political party which, for good or for bad, did help in steer in India in at least politically united direction. So its contribution should never be underestimated. I think today, of course, the Congress party is a very different animal altogether. There comes a time when dynastic politics becomes a liability. I'm not saying that it's always going to be so, and that it's in every place it is. It depends on who's inherited it and how it's being chugging along. But I think in the context of the Gandhis for today, it's become a very limiting force. And the Congress, again, it's groping for an identity. At one time, it looks like a sort of NGO type organization which advocates policies which it seems to be taking a leaf from the lunatic fringe of the American Democratic Party. It's that middle of the road, the default party of the Indian establishment, which actually marked the Congress at one time. That's gone. And it must reflect into why it's gone. Has it because the Indian establishment itself has changed, the elite has changed, the social relationships have changed, and the Congress hasn't been able to catch up with it? Or has there been a greater, what the BJP has successfully done is bring in a large number of groups which were on the margins of politics and bring them into the center stage, dispossessing an old elite. These various changes have social engineering which has been done. And the Congress hasn't been able to cope with those very successfully, which is why it finds itself increasingly less and less important, but it's still important there.
Would you say one of the problems Congress faces is that a new class of Indian is now important and is running the country? Mr. Modi it's often said, has brought a new generation, a new type of Indian to the forefront. And this is someone Congress has no contact or relationship with.
Well, I think, Karan, that's quite evident that I think you and I, we represented a sort of an assertive elite India, which no longer is as significant as it was, say, 30 years ago. That's quite obvious, and I think today what we are getting is the people from the small towns, people who are from whose education is primarily in the Indian languages, whose way of thinking is far more authentic and rooted. Those are the people who are coming up, and also groups in terms of caste and social communities, groups of which who were terribly on the margin. So some of them, in terms of their articulation, may not be as what I'd say rounded as some of the earlier generation. But I think it's important that in terms of the widening of the space of democracy, this is happening. But it's a reality.
Okay.
Anybody who denies this reality is and I think the Congress is still sort of clinging on to the ancien regime. It's the family, it's the the old connected people of an earlier generation who have lost their significance, fighting on, carping very significantly, having a voice in the international world, but not having enough of a domestic space. These are the features of the Congress. And I think it's quite evident. I mean, it's a fascinating sociological study.
We're coming to the end of this interview. Let me ask you two quick questions. 75 years is, of course, a landmark, but it's also just 1 year in the history of the country. Look down the road for me. What sort of country would your party, the BJP, like India to be 25 years from now?
Well, I think one of the things which India is the country which any nationalist Indian would like is that it's an India which matters. It's India whose voice counts in the world. It's an India whose citizens are proud when they hold up an Indian passport, when they wave the Indian flag. And why does this pride come about? Because the pride comes about from what has been done within the country. That there are facets of this country where life is easier, where it's greater degree of prosperity, where poverty has shrunk or has disappeared, where the person from the northeast doesn't feel discriminated vis-a-vis the person from the Hindi heartland. These are features which I think there's a greater cohesiveness about India. There is a distinctiveness about regional identity, but there is this unity. And I think that intermingling of India, the fact that today we have Indians who are constantly traveling from within one part to another, that sense. And I think we also, what is important is that, like, say, countries like Japan and all, we also have a fierce sense of our inheritance. And I think that we are not in a melting pot, a global melting pot, which actually means Americanization.
Okay.
We are not in a global. We are Indians, and I think it's how we assert ourselves that we will be counted in the world.
My last question, what position or role do you see for India's minorities, and in particular for India's Muslims, in this future country 25 years from now?
Well, I think the Muslims are very much a part of India. Anybody who says Muslims are not part of India, I mean, they might have distinct ways of worship, but that doesn't make them less of an Indian in any way. But I think there is a baggage which is there, with the baggage of separatism, which really the Pakistan issue which you invoked. I hope that in the coming days that'll ease out and that'll no longer be a factor. I think what really the thing where the Muslim community must introspect a little bit is that in India, which is becoming far more authentic, why is a section of the Muslim community uneasy with that process? They should not be uneasy with that process as long as their own distinctive ways, some of which are also very much regarded as part of an Indian process. And as long as there is equity, there's a degree of equity or total equity as far as the distribution of resources of the state is concerned, that the state remains scrupulously neutral and, if I may say, secular in that respect. But society is far more culturally rooted.
Swapan Dasgupta, a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much, Karan.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Thank you for your time. Goodbye.